Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So the topic for today's webinar is e-learning design for non-designers, enhancing your online learning with eWorks. So my name is Chris Dunkley, and I'm Senior Multimedia Designer at eWorks.
And hi, my name is Alex Bennetts. I'm a learning designer at eWorks.
So we're both part of eWorks Learning Design team. So our role might also be known as multimedia designer or course developer. For today's webinar, we just wanted to explain what we're kind of going to be focusing on. So if this diagram represents the whole process of e-learning development from kickoff to handover. So today's webinar, we're focusing on kind of this part right near the end. So at this stage, you've already received content from either a client or from your instructional designer. And usually this is in a storyboard form and you're ready to start building. So that's our focus today, is on the build. So at eWorks, we focus on a wide variety of tools, depending on the requirements of our client. So this might mean that we're building with in an LMS, such as Moodle, or using a development tool like Articulate Storyline. So yes, this presentation that we're doing today is actually built using Storyline. So yeah, to help get a feel for the audience today and get you thinking about today's topic, we've got a question for everyone. So if you can put your answers in the chat, and the question is, what features of e-learning do you like, and what features of e-learning do you dislike? Anna in the chat saying, my main focus areas are colors and images, and I don't like lots of scroll. So I don't think anyone wants to scroll.
We have a few people saying navigation is something they dislike. So scrolling, lots of moving around, bad UX, these kind of things. Too many clicks to get to the point. Yeah.
Rehan is saying, love Storyline, but don't like the limitation of Rise. Probably touching on some of that today. Like collaboration, Linda's saying like collaboration and dislike click-through interactive content.
Self-paced modules that often design around passive learning, or dislike bad contrast, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. Some of the things we do like are clean design and flexibility, where to learn, and interactivity. Great. Feel like you're going to enjoy some of the things we have today. Accessibility, timeliness, great.
Yeah. Okay, so we might move on now to the presentation. So today we're going to be focusing on 4 key focus areas. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is design. So specifically, we're talking about visual design in this case. And so, there are core design principles that apply to any piece of design. So they apply whether we're talking about a poster or a menu at a restaurant, or a user interface, or even e-learning content. So you can find a ton of articles about these online, and if you're interested, I would encourage you to research them and find out about some of the core design principles. But without going into the actual individual principles, they're very important when you're talking about learning, because bad design will become a barrier to the learning, whereas the good design will benefit or just get out of the way of the learning. I wanted to kind of give a piece of advice that's been a kind of fundamental thing for me as I was trying to learn to become better at design in a kind of meaningful and measurable way. And that piece of advice is to always try and make sure that each element that you include in your design has a meaning to it. So a reason that you're choosing this layout, that piece of the layout, and not another. So I have some examples on the next slide. So you can see two colors, like why have I paired these colors together, and a block of text, and why have I made a certain piece of text bold. And then another layout with, and why have all the boxes been positioned. So I think that part of being a good designer is having reasons why you've made these types of decisions. And the more experience that you have going through this part of the process, you'll start to realize that there's usually a reason why something looks right that is based on a pattern or a system, that rather than just thinking like, okay, that looks right, and moving on. So if I kind of reveal to you the justification for these examples, you can see some of the reasons why they work. So the first example, these are complementary colors. So when you pair them together, they work well together, and they sit on opposite sides of the color wheel, and they kind of increase each other's impact when you see them together. In the second example, the text has been bolded because it's an instruction, and this would be a rule that we would apply throughout the whole course to create a consistent rule that helps guide the learner through and to point out whenever there's an instruction. And then the third example, everything's actually on a 15 pixel grid. And so that helps it feel like everything's evenly spaced, and it will guide you as to like where to place things. So I don't think any of these are like giant revelations in terms of like design, but they are kind of small patterns that you can use to help you to achieve a consistent level of professional quality with everything that you do. And the more often that you go through the process of thinking about these rules to justify your layouts, the more that you'll start to notice patterns or design systems like this with everything that you're doing. So I like this process of thinking about this because it allows you to break the rules just as easily as you would follow them. So the important thing being that you've thought about why you're doing something, and then, well, you know, assuming that you've justified it out to yourself, then you can go ahead and break it, knowing that you've got a reason for doing so. So, and also my experience is that even when you feel like you're breaking the rules and doing something that's got no justification to it, you'll come back to it later and realize that, oh, it's actually has a connection that you didn't recognize earlier. So another part of the design is branding. So so at eWorks, at the start of each project, we gather assets such as logo files and style guides from our clients, and we use these to make custom templates that match our clients' branding. So the ideal that we are aiming for is to create something that's indistinguishable from a product that was created by our client's team, and kind of can be seamlessly presented with the rest of their content. So every eWorks build is therefore a little bit different, and customized to our clients' needs. So yeah, now that was the end of design. Now Alex is going to take over and speak about engagement.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. All right, so why is engagement important? When we're talking about engagement, what we're talking about as learning designers is we're asking ourselves a question, which is, what is the most effective way we can communicate a piece of learning? So content is often important from a human perspective. Think about like learning first aid, or from an organizational perspective, this might be how following procedures can save time and money. So it's usually pretty important that the learner understands what we're trying to teach them. But just because something is important or beneficial doesn't mean it's easily consumed. So think about flavored cough syrup. Even though it is good, useful medicine, it still needs to be made approachable for its target audience, which in this case is kids. So we can't take the same approach. How do we make online learning more approachable without diluting the content? So let's look at some of our favorite ways to make courses more engaging. And the first way is activities, and you'll be familiar with some of these basic activities. You mentioned them at the start already. These are the bread and butter of in e-learning, really. Things that are like select and reveal activities, flip cards, and tabs, which are all instances where more information is hidden away behind an intentional click. But we also like to use a lot of question activities like multi-choice questions and sorting activities, which usually work as knowledge checks to make sure learners have been understanding what they're being taught. And later on, we'll look at how text entry interactions can get a little more complicated. But at their simplest, we use them to collect feedback or ask learners for their name to customize the course. But an important thing, as Chris mentioned for visual design, is it's important that each element is intentional. It's not just chosen for the sake of it. I think that's what people get bugged at. But we also do like to use more advanced interactions, things like scenarios, where you choose what actions to take in a given situation. I like to think about old style choose your own adventure books, basically. And scenarios usually involve characters whose decisions you'll be taking on, but sometimes they're a little more direct, and they're putting you in a situation and asking, what would you do? What would you say? We also like to use simulations where you work directly in a mock version of a real software or any kind of specialized process, really. This might be learning how to navigate through an internal file sharing system, which I'm sure you've all had to use. Or even simpler than that, it could be correctly filling out an invoice sheet for a plumbing business. It can be as detailed or as straightforward as needed, really. We also like to use custom reporting, which is where any text, which could be feedback or answers that the learner has written into the course, is captured for safekeeping. And once we've captured that, we can publish it into a takeaway format. For example, we could publish a PDF of all the ideas the learner has come up with during a course, so they can take it home and print it, keep it with them. We can also create and edit videos, which are another way to engage learners. These are not just videos of people acting or talking to the camera, but also animations that can be used to make dry information a little bit livelier. Sometimes videos can show up an organization's personal touch. So this could be as simple as introducing key staff, for example, but we find them helpful in communicating the less tangible elements, things like culture or the feeling of a workplace. Animations in particular can be great for case studies or interactive scenarios, as we covered, where we can see characters interacting. We like to use every tool in a kit when we tell stories, because that's kind of what we think a good course should be, a story that is communicating some kind of knowledge. So the more we engage them, whether that's through videos or interactions, we want them to sit forward. The more they sit forward, they're more likely to listen, and they're more likely to learn what we're trying to teach. Yeah, cool. All right, Chris, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So yeah, now next section we're going to be talking about is quality. Yeah, so there's a couple of different areas that we want to talk about in this section. So the first is usability, which is very, very important when you're improving learners' experience with the content. And a couple of people in the opening question mentioned navigation, which is a big part of that. So yeah, how do we go about improving usability? So I find that this is usually a combination of confirming the learner's expectations based on other software that they've been using over the years, as well as establishing clear and consistent rules within the content itself. So provide some examples of this. So the first one that we're talking about is confirming learner expectations. So as I mentioned, this is learned from using other websites or operating systems, or people using their phone, and like the way that standard interactions work on those. So here we've got some examples of symbols that most people probably immediately understand. So the first one is obviously a button. The second one is probably clear to everyone that it's a link, and the icon after it probably means something about like how that link's going to open when clicked on. And then we've got these icons, which individually are quite simplistic, but when placed together, they take on additional meaning. And even though they don't have any text associated with them, most people probably know like what they're going to do. So yeah, I'm not suggesting that you have to use these symbols, but it helps to recognize them as shortcuts to having your learner understand how to interact with your content. So the second part of the improving the usability was to establish clear and consistent rules. So a good example I like to use for this is related to quiz questions. So particularly for like a storyline like layout like this, I found that it's a good structure to follow is to put the quiz question on the left-hand side and then provide feedback on the right. So aside from creating a consistent expectation about where the content is going to appear, there's a couple of benefits to this. So the first I would mention is that the learner can return to this screen after they've completed the quiz, if they're doing a review, for example, And they can always see the quiz question and the feedback simultaneously because they're laid out next to each other rather than on top of each other. And also this layout matches the orientation of most screens. So it's kind of maximizing the amount of screen real estate that you've got to lay out the content. Also, we're in a culture where we primarily read left to right. So it makes sense to have the first part of the content appear on the left, and then you submit it, and then it provides you the follow-up information on the right-hand side, and lets you focus kind of flow naturally through the screen. So yeah, these are the types of things that it's good to think about when you're trying to improve usability. And if we add a header and a footer to this and some navigation, it becomes kind of a good template for a lot of different types of e-learning content. So here's an example of a page that kind of, you can see the structure applied to it pretty directly when you break it down like this. So the next area to talk about with quality is accessibility, which is a growing concern, obviously, for everyone and probably required by many organizations that some of you might work for. So yeah, at eWorks, we follow the principles that are outlined in the web content accessibility guidelines, and this is the international standard for accessibility. And it's also the standard that we try to maintain for all our builds by default. And these are principles that must be followed, or considered, sorry, throughout the design and build process. And I think that people tend to misunderstand and assume that web accessibility is about making content available to like those with disabilities. Like, for example, like a common one people might think about is color contrast, and that's definitely part of it, but there are many of the requirements that are actually just about improving the experience and the consistency for everyone. So it really is kind of a lot of it is about usability. So another of our core focuses that plays into improving usability is responsive design. So yeah, we do this. This is responsive design is all about basically improving the way that the content works across different devices and screen sizes. So ideally, you want the content itself to change depending on like what sort of screen size and orientation of the user screen. But ideally, it should at least be scaling so that it can function better. So we do this because we know that learners access content in a variety of ways. So I think that when we imagine someone completing e-learning content, we tend to think of them as sitting at a desk and just trying to bang through the thing that they're obligated to complete as quickly as possible. But we know from our experience with our clients that there's actually like a wide variety of different types of students or learners, and some clients will have their students or learners spending hours completing a course and taking notes and printing off pages, whereas others will be viewing the content on a train, on their phone. Maybe some people are watching this webinar while they're sitting in bed right now. We don't really know. So yeah, it's our responsibility to like meet the learners where they are and make sure they have a decent experience regardless of the device that they're using at the time.
Great, thanks, Chris. So for our last focus area, we're just going to talk about how we reflect on and revise our work. And the first way we do this is basically early in the life of a project, we build a prototype. And what this is, it's a slice of what the final e-learning course will look like with all the key visuals and details set up, such as navigation, menus, and your branding. This allows a chance to see how the course feels, just as it would in its final state, and to propose adjustments or ask for clarity for things you're not unsure about. During this prototyping phase, we sometimes uncover questions that you might not have even realized to ask in the first place. And this is not uncommon at all. And these could be things like, do you need your progression to be locked down? Would the course be improved with the narrator to guide the learner maybe? Or is the pacing too slow or maybe too fast? It's not what you expected. What can we do to change that? Or it can be as simple as, do you want the navigation buttons to be sapphire blue rather than royal blue? Easy, let's update all that now in the prototyping phase. That's what it's here for. And once we've taken in all the feedback, all the early prototype feedback, we can start building the full course in earnest, leaving you or the client to get on with your own work, which is ideally how we all want to work. And throughout the year, we like to do internal testing and polishing. Our team is always conducting these reviews and holding discussions about our processes and the tools we used, with the goal of improving the visual appeal, the overall quality and structure of our work. We also have an internal QA team that completes an official review of our content to ensure everything is basically as it should be before it goes back to you. And we also do a final review. Before signing off, we make the content available on our feedback platform, Articulate Review, which is a great little software where you're able to view the full course page by page and leave feedback tied to specific items, whether that's text, a quiz, images, video, whatever it is. You can specifically comment on that thing. These might be asking questions of our development team, updating the content yourself, requesting changes that has changed since you submitted the original pitch or storyboard. You'd be surprised how many people haven't realized they've forgotten something until something important until the very end of a project, and until they see the whole thing in front of you, you kind of don't realize, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this. Oh yeah, I would love this in here, and that's why this is here. It's part of the process. It always will be part of the process. Cool. Great. Now that we've covered the 4 focus areas, we're pretty much ready to hand the course over. And what this means is handover usually involves sending sometimes the source files, so you can make adjustments to the content yourselves, or we can engage our teams to take in updates for you. But we also like delivering the course as a SCORM package, which is a format that can be easily plugged into a wide range of systems. And the reason I think SCORM is great is because it helps keep track of a learner's progress and course results, but it isn't confined to one software, which is nice. Sometimes this package will be hosted on a learning management system, which you'll often be here referred to just as an LMS, or uploaded to some kind of internal staff training system or website. And I think it'd be remiss of me not to say, if you don't have your own LMS or portal, eWorks does offer hosting solutions if you need somewhere to put your shiny new training, but that's for another time. Thank you so much for listening to us today. Before we get to the Q&A, I'd love to mention that we have one more webinar left for this year, which is coming up on the 16th of November. The webinar is called Unlock the Potential of Your Organization with eLearning, and it will be hosted by our expert colleagues from the eWorks LMS team. Great, thank you. Now the floor is open for questions. I'd love to hear what you think, what questions you have, and so on.
Yeah, so Adriana was asking, what is the most common change we get asked to do on a build? I think probably one of the most common ones is like, a lot of the time, like, Alex touched on this, but like when people first, like when they submit the storyboard to us, they haven't actually thought about how it's going to look.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think probably one of the most common things is that people will overload pages with too much content, and it needs to be split, be presented as one page in a module, but in a storyboard, sorry, but it should actually be like 6 pages. And so we end up having to push for them to subdivide it, or they kind of see that this is actually quite an overwhelming activity when you've got so much text on one page.
Yeah, Monica is asking how complex can the interactive quiz be when we mentioned build your own story, choose your own adventure kind of thing, and can that be part of a quiz with feedback? Yeah, pretty much. It can be, as depending on the software we're using to build the e-learning, it can be quite complex. And we usually do like to have specific feedback tied to most of our quizzes or scenarios, so that if you're getting not just if you're getting something wrong, but if you're getting something mostly right, or if we just want to give more context to an answer or a back and forth dialogue, we have that feedback there.
Yeah. So Alex, Monica's also said, do you know what e-learning software is doing well lately that people are using more of? There are a few companies doing it. Yeah, so my feeling is that it's like kind of diversifying a lot, where there's a lot of like startup companies making tools, especially kind of like drag and drop interfaces. Again, kind of like what you see is what you get type things, where you can quickly pull together something that looks kind of has a relatively high level of quality straight out of the box, but doesn't like allow as much customization. So yeah, at eWorks we kind of respond to whatever our clients need with in terms of applications, but we're primarily focused around storyline or articulate package basically, which is storyline and rise, and also LMS builds. Yeah, so Anna was asking, what do you think of Adobe Captivate? Yes, I've used it in the past. I've not used it as much recently, but my understanding is that they've recently kind of restructured it a bit to like more like what I was just saying, of like focusing more on like drag and drop interface. So yeah, I think it had been around for a while, and like since Flash basically, and so I think that some of it was kind of still built on that sorry, on that legacy.
We also have another question. Does your model assume there are facilitators behind the scenes who support the students? A lot of the work we do is not just self-directed, but online learning that someone is taking independently from teachers, facilitators. It really depends on the framework that whoever's trying to deliver the course in the first place is, if they want to have more facilitators behind the scenes. Some of the work we do is in the vet sector, and this is often supplementary or part of a bigger course which does have facilitation. So there'll be online quizzes and online tests and the theoretical knowledge, and then there is also a teacher who goes along with the student and teaches them all the practical knowledge and gets them to ask questions. And then in those cases, there are assessments that are marked individually. It's not just a quiz being answered yes or no kind of thing.
Cool. Alex?
I think we're pretty much hitting time, but Chris, did you want to drop the feedback form?
Yeah, yeah, so we've got a feedback form here, SurveyMonkey. So yeah, if you're able to provide feedback, that's very helpful to us in terms of improving the webinar. So I've just dropped it into the chat now. Yeah,
Right.
yes, I think
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for spending your time with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.